Hey, I'm Gabe Smith, and I'm super passionate about leaders leading like human beings, not in lines, but in circles and rhythms and seasons. And the reality is, I've spent decades leading and coaching people across nonprofit world, the military, and corporate spaces, and I've seen leaders burn out over and over again. And I want to help you not be one of those people. So here's the deal: if you listen to this conversation, you'll walk away with a brand new understanding of how time works and a very practical framework to lay out your next year. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to start number one with the problem. We're going to talk about why our relationship with time and planning is broken. Number two, I'm going to introduce you to a shift. We're moving from lines to circles and from plans to maps. Number three, I'm going to explain my 90-day growth sprint methodology that's going to help you unlock the potential of your team over the next year. And finally, we're going to close with vision, really helping you understand what happens when leaders adopt this approach and teams and leaders begin to move with clarity and momentum. I'm so excited. Let's jump in.
Yeah, this is so good. I mean, we're just going to start doing these chats because we realize we have these conversations all the time. No one else gets to benefit. I'm really energized. I'm really inspired.
Yeah.
Um, so for you watching, like, go ahead and subscribe, and you can get these videos. We're going to start doing them on a weekly basis. Gabe, yeah, why don't you just dive into this topic? Because I think this is super fascinating. It's like the merging of, I guess it's a little bit of what you've lived, which is the merging of like understanding how people and people groups work and how life is designed with leadership and organization life.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, one of the big cataclysmic shifts for me happened in my 6 years living in Cape Town, South Africa. And at first, I'm a West Point grad, like military infantry officer, like total planner, like went to school to learn how to plan for the military. And so I show up to lead this nonprofit in the South African context. And I was super frustrated for like a year because maybe you've heard this saying, like, and some people mean it in a demeaning way of like, hey, we're on African time. And they mean things move slowly and nothing happens, whatever. And that's the way I felt for the first year. And then I made this discovery that like our African friends, the people we were doing life with and working with, man, they just lived in such a much freer way and they still accomplished big things in the world. And I couldn't figure it out. How are you getting all this stuff done? And yet like you love your life. And the shift is they think in circles and seasons and rhythms, and they don't think about time as much as they think about events. And so that just really like unlocked this concept for me and got me down this road of just thinking about like what would happen if I shifted my own thinking away from, and maybe some of you identify with this, like whenever I would open up my calendar, and this is still true to this day, and calendars are laid out in lines and boxes and they're very defined. And I just get like anxious. Like as soon as I
Yeah.
open up my calendar, just seeing those boxes and the order and the disorder, like just makes me super nervous. And so I just started to think about like, what if I just punted that and instead started thinking first about like my time and my life and my work and my energy as like a circle of rhythms that repeat over time.
Yeah, which is, I definitely have that same reaction to the lines and boxes. And even as I made the shift, used to be in corporate world, about 10 years of detoxing now and trying to design my calendar life better. I feel this every week. The days and the weeks where I have entire blocks, usually entire days, where it's blocked off and based on one focus or one event are by far my favorite days. Like they're more fun and enjoyable, but they're also more productive. But yet we do live in the line and box world here. So it's
We do.
hard it's hard to make sense of that.
Yeah, and I think I'm not saying like punt your calendar. Obviously, we can't do that. Like we live in the world of boxes and rows and calendars. But I want to introduce like this idea of just like at least acknowledge that there's a problem if our only way of thinking about our time is in a line.
Yeah.
And here's what it is. I think is like as leaders, we often live in a straight line of productivity. Like we're always pushing forward and we're rarely stepping back. And so time becomes something that we have to manage or control. And at least for me and the hundreds of leaders that I've worked with over a lot of years, what I've seen is like when we're trying to manage and control this linear idea of time, it leads to exhaustion and honestly, like a loss of meaning. because I think linear time creates this illusion of progress, but it disconnects people and the human aspect. Because it's really true that not all time is equal when it
Yeah.
comes to being a human being, right? Like your
Well,
8 a.m. isn't your 3 p.m.
that's fascinating. I've never connected it, but I think that's part of why I love retreat settings so much because you're disconnected from the lines and boxes. So it's easier to be more present with the people, which,
Exactly.
like a long retreat, I mean, that's my ideal. But even this weekend, I went with my family to a winery on a Saturday. And even in those 3 hours, I felt it. I felt the disconnect and the being more present. Maybe it's because of that.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I just think if you just think about it, like as people, like just think about nature. Nature doesn't move in lines. Walk outside, walk in your yard, go for a walk in the park, look around, look for, look for some linear constructs. You can't find them, right? But what you see in nature is seasons. Like we're in my most favorite season of the year, football
Mm.
season, but it's
Yeah.
fall, right? And like we're sitting on the porch. I was sitting on my porch with my wife just before this call, and the leaves are starting to fall, and it's a little like there's a crisp feeling in the air, and it's a changing of a season, and and it's visceral, and you feel it, and you live in it, and I think this idea of like we live in seasons, nature lives in seasons. You think about like the
Mm.
rhythms of a day, like the sun rises, the sun sets. Like that's not a linear thing on a calendar. That's a circle. Like it's
Yeah.
just like the way the planets move. And I think there's something in that of like we're made to move in harmony with that in many ways.
Yeah. My gosh, this is so fascinating. All right, so take us into this. Can you just like explain this more? Because it does feel like a paradigm shift. It really does.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big shift. So it's what this comes down to is first things. Cause like we said, we're not advocating like get rid of your calendar. Like you'll get fired right tomorrow because you have appointments. But I
Uh-huh.
think it's like taking a step back, and the word I would use, this is an invitation. Like if you're a leader, this is an invitation to take a step back from your calendar. And instead of putting things in a linear fashion on the calendar, that's not the first exercise. The first thing is thinking about like, what are the natural rhythms of your life? So let's just think about that for a second. And we can think about that. Let's just think a day at a time. Like in a day, I'm just going to ask you, Steve, like in a
Yeah.
day, like what are the circular, natural, repeating? Because when we're talking circles, we're talking things that repeat.
Uh,
Like, so what's a daily rhythm that just like repeats in your life over and
yeah.
over and over?
I mean, right away, first thing that comes to mind is meals
Meals.
and
Yep.
sleeping. And I'm not typically like a routine person, but I've started getting better routines in life. So my morning routine, which is more of a set design thing related to work, and then evening routine, which is more just happen naturally in our families, where we're at as a family, like how things unfold every evening. Those are the first things that come to mind.
No, that's good. So let's just take, like you mentioned, meals and sleep, like two vital functions for living, right? Like if we don't, and we know that like people get really unhealthy when these things get out of rhythm, like when you don't eat regular healthy meals at the same time every day, when you don't get regular sleep, right, every day,
Yeah.
like your body actually starts to break down. And so it's not enough to put a block on your calendar and go lunch, or like I just need to consume food, or I just need to like sleep for these 3 hours, right? Like the bigger picture is we need to have repeatable, and here's the important word, sustainable cycles that fuel our living, right? And so thinking about taking care of our bodies, just like you mentioned, yeah, when are we eating? Because let's talk about eating for a minute. Something, I have a daughter in college. I'm kind of at the far end of the parenting journey. No kids at home anymore. But what I would say looking back, like one of the really formative spaces in our family was evening dinner together. And that was something we didn't practice perfectly, but most of the time, like tried to have dinner at the same time and sit at the table. And I know you guys do the same in the Perkins household. I'll just ask you, like, what happens when you sit at the table with your family regularly? Like, what does that do in your life?
Yeah. Well, obviously, conversation. There's been multiple points where we think about whether it's just our marriage or our family life, and we're like, man, I wish we would talk more often about X, or I wish we would just like be able to catch up around our day more about Y. And it always kind of comes back to dinner because it's kind of our only reliable routine in this season. And we've tried other times of the day or week, and it's like, well, no, those get botched all the time. But dinner is reliable because we got to eat, and that's the time we're all usually all home.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of this like set apart space where you say, we're not putting a whole bunch of other events because this part of our daily rhythm is that important because this is where we're going to connect. We're not only just going to get nourished like physically, but like we're going to connect. Like you just said it, like this is the only time we're all together, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not, these circular rhythms aren't things that matter every time, but they're things that matter over time. And so it's not like if you miss one dinner with your family, it's a big deal. But over time, if you don't make that a priority, like there's a cost to that relationally, right? There's a cost to your body physically if you don't get, regular sleep. So the invitation is like to step back and literally think about like what are the necessary circular sustainable rhythms of life on a
Hmm.
daily basis. And you might, people might think of others like, for me, I get up early because that's my only, and I started this when, Madeline was really young and like would get up at 6 a.m. And so I started getting up at like 4:30 or 5 a.m. because that's my time to be quiet. And for
Yeah.
me and my spiritual life is really important. So like being quiet and praying and reading and journaling, like, and so, that's an important rhythm for me,
Yeah.
along with table and rest and things like that. Uh, but we can zoom this out and look at like a week, right? And here's an interesting thing. I think it was in sometime in like the 1960s, the Soviet Union tried this experiment to try to reinvent the work week in under communism into a 10-day work week because they were like, we're going to be the most productive society on earth because they're remember what we said is leaders live in this straight line of productivity. And so they thought, man, we're going to crush the West. We're going to win the space race. And we're going to do it by changing the work week because we're going to get the rest of the world's getting 7 days. We're going to get 10 days. And guess what happened? It didn't work. Like the most powerful communist government, totally in control of people, right? Go to the gulag. If you don't
Yeah.
do what we tell you, says 10-day work week doesn't work. Why not? And there's been a lot of sociological kind of thought reflecting on that. And it's quite interesting. Like every culture of the world operates on a 7-day week. Think about that for a minute. Like that's
Yeah.
profound.
Yeah.
And so there's something in us that like we're made to live in a 7-day circle. And there's a book by that name, which I love like that. So it's a 7-day circle. Why do I say circle? Because it's not a line. It's a
Right.
repeat. It's repeating and repeating and repeating and
Yeah.
repeating, right?
Well, it's super fascinating to me because I did a bit of a personal passion project study a while back around different teams I was working with and what was the ideal cadence for planning priorities, basically. Because, most teams struggle with setting priorities. And it was like very anecdotal, but it was just my own little thought experiment. And as I was trying different stuff, I noticed, okay, a day is way too short because you don't have enough time to get things accomplished. And then a month was way too long because things like priorities shifted too much in that much amount of time. With as much bias removed as possible, is like what it landed on was a week was the ideal frame of time to set priorities and then do them. Set priorities and then do them. And it's like, ta-da! I mean,
Hello, like we're made for this.
I didn't have your teaching yet on circular time, but that's exactly what it landed on. It was like this is the right amount of time to do that rhythm.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Yeah, because in planning, it's the same thing, and we're going to get to that like later in this conversation, how this like changes and shifts the way we think about planning. But just one more note on this week, because here's a fundamental principle of thinking as time in circles instead of lines, is that not all time is equal in a circle.
Mm.
And so, like in lines, we treat all time like if we go Monday through Friday, like your average leader would just go like, "Yeah, I'm just playing Tetris. I'm just trying to fit things in, and I'm not really thinking about like, man, like, are there differences in these time blocks?" And we might think a little bit about it, but not a lot. But circular time says no, there's a time for different things. And so like I'm going to bring out the big one. And I just did this with a client, is introduce this idea of a day of rest. And I just asked, I was actually with he and his wife, and it said, hey, um, do you guys have, like, what does your day of rest look like? And they both looked at me like, what are you talking about? Like, I
Yeah.
have no idea what that means. And so, this is an ancient kind of thing, comes out of like ancient cultures, but it's a Hebrew concept of Sabbath, right? This idea that like we are made to work out of rest. And this is an important shift. Like we don't work like in our culture. What happens is when we think in linear time, we work our way into oblivion in like of like a slumber. We
Yeah, like
have to, like,
having to
we're
rest.
exhausted. Like
Hmm.
we're in a catatonic slumber, we're just exhausted. But the idea of like really living in circular rhythms is that like you're made to rest one day out of seven. And that like when you do that, the invitation is to work out of the rest. So we begin our work week from a state of being rested, and then we live out of that rest throughout the week. So that's the most obvious example of like there's got to be a day where that's Saturday for you or Sunday or whatever, depending on your place in life. Like, but that is a different day. Like that is different time. That time is not the same as Wednesday afternoon. It's just it has a different purpose. And if we extrapolate that out and we look at the rest of the week, we know the same thing is true, not just from like no matter where you fall on the religious kind of spectrum, just think as a human, like think from an energy level perspective. If I said, Steve, map out your energy like Monday through Friday, like tell me, like, what would the high points of your energy be? Like if I said, name your three highest energy points Monday through Friday, what would you say?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely Monday morning, like
Yeah.
Monday, first half of Monday. And then the other ones are hard to say, but I think it's like Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon for me.
Yeah. Really good. Now, on the other side of that, like, what are your low energy moments?
Yeah. Well, I hate it admitting this, but it's like Friday, really all of Friday now. Let's be honest, post
Yeah.
COVID, all of Friday. I used to
Yeah.
loved and had lots of energy on Friday. The older I get, the more I'm like, no, my brain is not operating at its peak on Friday at all. And I think that's also being noticed more post-pandemic
Yeah.
work world. But yeah, there's like a throughout the week declining of energy and brain power.
Yeah. So this is another way to think about your life and your work and your time in circles, is think of it like if I said, hey, map out energy, go scale 0 to 5. 0 is like your lowest energy moments of the week, like 5's your highest. Like just map it out. Like what would you find? And do that daily and then do that weekly. And you could draw it in a circle, right? And then you could begin to conceive of like your time differently, in that like, hey, and what I would guarantee you is that like those cycles of energy are going to repeat, right? It's not, I mean, yes, we're going to have trips and one-off things, but in general, like they're going to be the same. You're going to be like Monday morning, it's a 5, Friday 0, and it's going to repeat that way. And so then it just invites a different set of questions of
Yeah.
saying, really, we think of time as something to spend or save. But I think this is like, and what great leaders learn in this is that we learn to steward time as a rhythm, and like this rhythm of living in circles instead of boxes.
What to you is if you shift the mindset from I'm working and then resting to recover from that, and I shift it to resting in order to work, like working out of the rest, starting with the rest. Like what's the benefit of that?
Benefit is like when I get to my day of rest, and actually like day of fun, when I get to the spaces where I can just really enjoy my life, I actually can enjoy it. And I'm saying this as somebody who like learned this by being somebody who did it the wrong way for a long time. I mean, when I had, a young kid at home, and I'm in my early 30s and I'm like in grad school and working a full-time job and raising a toddler and trying to, do a marriage and all that. Maybe some people can identify with that. Man, I would just get to the weekend and I would just be exhausted. And then it would just be like, okay, I got how many naps can I get in between? And then I can go play and then I can go do, but it's like I couldn't really enjoy it. And so I think part of the benefit is, and again, it's this idea of stewarding your time and your energy in these circles, is that when you get to the place of rest, I'm not exhausted. And the
Yeah.
reason I'm not exhausted is because I've managed my rhythms and my energy throughout the week. And it's not, I'm just not like, man, I'm just, and I think there's this mentality, especially in the corporate space, of like winning is just going all out and expending all of my energy and like, and then I'm just going to collapse and fall over dead. But that's what winning looks like. That's how you get ahead. And what I would tell you is an almost 50-year-old, that will work for a little while until it doesn't, and bad things will happen to you in your relationships, to your body. It's not worth it. It's a way more sustainable thing to think about. You know, how do I get to my weekend actually being at a high energy state? Which some
Yeah.
people might go like, how is that possible? But it is possible.
So good.
The other thing I would mention just on, this idea of time shifting from lines and boxes to circles. So we talk about the day, we talk about the week, but talk about, I mentioned seasons, and this is important in nature. You know, we said there's seasons, and seasons are for different things. Like if you pay attention to nature in your yard, like the trees don't do the same things. The grass doesn't behave the same way. Like the nature responds to the conditions around it. And in the same way, like we have seasons of our year as well. And I think this is particularly important for leaders of teams to pay attention, that like if your only conception of time is everybody, like we're going all out for 12 months, like I think everybody would hear that and go, that's dumb. And yet, like if we're having a moment of lucidity and honesty, people would go, yeah, like that is kind of how I lead and live. And the problem is that like we're made for seasons, like in our work as well. And I love the metaphor of farming because I just think it like works in
Hmm.
organizational life. Of there's a season for planting. There's a time to plant new things, to start new work, right? And when you plant those things, there's not an expectation that I'm going to reap the benefit right now. It's like
Yeah.
I'm planting, and this is work. It's a very different kind of work, right? And then there's a growing season. There's a season where, man, we're watering and we're investing in what we've planted, and like, and we're trying to see it come to maturity. And then there's a harvest season where we get to like fully, take advantage of what we've planted and what we've grown. But then here's the other important one, is there's a rest season, and we have to let our teams and our organizations rest. And I do think there's a seasonal rhythm to that to pay attention to. And so that's the other meta kind of framework. Like this works not just for like the individual leader, but it works for organizational life if you have the power to control that.
Yeah. Yeah. How would a leader take those ideas and put it into practice?
Yeah,
Not not just personally, but their organization.
and this is kind of shifting into, I think, what we would talk about next, which is our kind of how do we plan? And because it's my first lesson on planning, is to think about planning differently, think about it in seasons. And so I think the first task would be to look at the year and say, based on your business model, on your client cycles, just different kind of things that might be outside of your control, when I would start with this question: when does it make sense to rest? Because again, we're in this paradigm of let's work out of rest. So let's, in our organizations, like what if we did something really countercultural and named our rest first? Now, for a lot of people, I think they would say, well, maybe that's like summer. Not everybody, but summer's kind of your typical time. Well, then you say like, well, what would it look like to create an environment where people really, we understand really like the point of this season is to rest, is, in military terminology, to refit and reorganize. I don't think we think about those things in corporate spaces, but it's really weird because if you're in the NFL, no one's looking at, the Carolina Panthers or whoever and going, you guys should just play football games year round.
Year
We'd make a
round.
lot more money. Like, why
Yeah.
not? Because like human beings couldn't survive that. And
Yeah.
yet we get into corporate spaces and we're like, everybody just work year round as hard as you can. And then we wonder why people burn out and hate their life, you know?
Yeah.
So instead, what would it look like to go, hey, how could we create, see that like there's a season of 3 months where the point is, man, let's get people rested. Let's get them reconnected with their families. Let's get them, and the military actually did a really good job of this. We would deploy and work really hard, but then there'd be a rest season where it's like, hey, we're going to shut the unit down. Everybody take leave and
Yeah.
go on vacations. And even if when you're coming back in that season, we're working like 2, 3 hours a day. And then you're going to go home and hang out with your kids.
Yeah.
Like what a wild idea that would be.
Yeah. Well, and the cool part is, of course, in a capitalist society with giant bottom line driven companies, which at the end of the day, no, there aren't people running these giant companies. It's computers that are trying to maximize profit all the time. So it's like in the big corporate world, you actually literally can't change that dynamic. Maybe you have some agency on your team at the team level, but I mean, it's part of why you and I love working with smaller organizations because a smaller company can like you can
Totally.
actually do that. You can implement all of this stuff if you want to, because you don't have to uh, maximize profit all year round, 365. So that's kind of exciting part to me. It's, thinking about how I might implement that or how people in those smaller organizations could, because you could actually make those changes and try it.
Totally. Yeah. And after that, and I won't go through all the seasons, but the rest one's the most important because it's the most countercultural. But I want to challenge people like listening to this. Like if you're a leader and you're listening to this and you have some agency to potentially do something like this, what is it you really believe? Like, do you believe that, like, if I allow my organization to rest for a significant period of time of the year, that that will lead to less productivity? Like, true or false? I think there's a lot of people, if you're being really honest, you'd say, yeah, I think we would lose like all our productivity if we did something like that. I would say like prove it because I actually think the opposite is true because we're just made to like work this way that you get 10x productivity out of your team. Think about how motivated people would be if they knew, man, my company cares for me so much that we have a whole season dedicated. We work, but like
Yeah.
we work at a different pace, right?
Well, I think most leaders know that too. Like I've experienced it. For me, for some reason, it's 2 weeks is the mark. After I've been on vacation out of office for 2 weeks, like things start clicking, huge things, big, important strategic things just start like falling into place out of
Totally.
nowhere. And it's the only time it's ever happened for me is after a 2 week amount of time out, things just start clicking. And it's always been the most game changing, most profitable, most you name it things for the entire company. So, because I
Totally.
struggle to believe that too. Like it's hard to believe like time off's going to be more productive. Yeah, right. But when I think back, it is true of my business that that's when the biggest progress has been made.
Yeah, and I think we're, Steve, primarily like our audience here is like knowledge workers. That just tends to be the space we're in. And so I think this is like 1000% true in knowledge work. Like harder case if you're on a factory floor,
Manufacturing.
but yeah, like, but even there, we can talk about like, we need to refit and do maintenance cycles and things like that. But like for knowledge work, I think what you're saying is totally true. The second and last season I would want to highlight is the planting season. Like when do you start new things? Like when do you invest in new work, in new ideas, and like really being thoughtful about, because I think what tends to happen in a lot of organizations is the good idea fairy or committee takes over. And it's like whenever we get a good idea and like then we just try to, or we're reacting to some kind of change. But like the idea of like, what if you thought ahead? Like, what is the most ideal point in the year? What's the season? And what would it
Yeah.
look like to really invest in a season where you're just like, we're starting stuff? And it's
Yeah.
not the whole year, but it's a part of it.
This just sounds more fun too. Let's be honest. It sounds a
It's
lot
a
more
lot more
fun.
fun. Yeah.
Okay, so couple of quick mentions. If you're listening, like the way we're gonna get these videos to you and the way you'll know that new ones are coming out every week is through the email club. So the link's in the description. Go ahead and get on the email club list so you know when these mini lessons come out. The second thing is if people want to just get in touch with you about working with you, whether it's coaching or with the team, what should they do for that?
Yeah, you can just go over to LinkedIn and you can DM me growth plan and I'll get right back with you and we can start a conversation.
Okay, cool. And we'll put your LinkedIn link in the description here too. All right. Well, any last words to close out that topic?
Yeah, I'll just say it's an invitation. It's countercultural, but I would encourage people give it a try and see what happens.